Well, welcome to Treeline. If you are new here, my name is David. I am the lead pastor here. And I haven't been here for a few weeks. Well, I've been here, but not teaching. So I'm excited to be back. And we are in Psalm 42 today. So the next 2 weeks, we're doing Psalm 42 through 43. And we're kind of doing Psalm 63 next week. And it's really interesting. These kind of two Psalms, they both begin in a very similar way. Let me actually read the beginning of Psalm 63. Psalm 63 is a description of life when God is like the apex of your worship and your life. And you find that choice for God to be just like everything to you. You find that choice to be like incredibly satisfying to you in this like deep way. That's Psalm 63. That's next week. Psalm 42 is a description of life when God is the apex of your worship and you find yourself unable to experience him. And I want to just look at how these two Psalms start. It's very interesting. Psalm 63, it starts like this. It says, "My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you in a dry land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory, because your steadfast love is better than life." And he says, "My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food." Psalm 42, "As a deer pants for flowing streams, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God." And then he asks, "When shall I come and appear before God?" And actually, my tears have been my food day and night, as they say to me all day long, "Where is your God?" Psalm 42 is a really beautiful psalm, but it's also kind of haunting, because Psalm 42 is speaking directly to something that we do not speak about very much. It is the raw and honest look into the war and the struggle that takes place in the soul of a person who believes in God, who loves God, who has wrapped up their whole life in God, and who finds themselves to have lost the experience of God in their life. The God that they love, they feel cut off from. And not in a superficial way, but in like a deeply painful kind of existential crisis kind of way. He's saying, "As a deer pants for streams of water, so pants my soul for you, O God." He's saying, my soul thirsts for God, for the living God. It's like how this psalm starts. It's like, I'm so thirsty for the God I can't seem to find anymore. Have you ever felt that way? Here's what we're doing this morning. We're going to let Psalm 42 guide us through this experience. And I just want you to know, if you've never had this experience before, you need to pay attention to Psalm 42, because it is likely that at some point in your life you will. Most people who walk with Jesus to the very end, there's some point in their life where they look around and they just go like, man, I can't feel like God is with me. Like the joy of my salvation just seems lost. Like I feel spiritually dry. I feel what Psalm 42 is saying. And so if you haven't felt that before, you should pay attention. But also, if you're in that today, you should know that the Bible wants to speak directly to you. You are not unseen by your Father in heaven. Actually, he knows where you are. And actually, he's written Psalm 42 in part to help lead you back to him. So we're going to look at this felt experience. And then we're going to look at some of the factors that might have led to it. But then the last thing we're going to do is try to find our way back home. Okay, so let's look at the felt experience. The psalmist just describes his experience like a deer who is panting for water, right? He's like, hey, this scene, maybe you've seen this, and we here in the Midwest, like most of the deers, like they're not panting, right? Like we have a lot of streams. You can't go anywhere within 6 miles of Michigan without being near some body of water, right? So our deers, they're great. They're not that thirsty. But this is in the Middle East, right? And so there are times where you'd have a deer that's like literally looking for these riverbeds, and it's in a time of drought. And so it'd be there walking on the riverbed, looking for the flowing streams, and there would be no water. And if this deer doesn't find some water quickly, it's going to die because it's dehydrated. So a deer that's panting has been thirsty for a really long time. This isn't someone who's having an off week, right? This isn't, Psalm 42 didn't come out of someone who's like, man, the worship didn't hit for me on Sunday, like it's kind of tough, right? It's like, this is going to be a hard week until I can get to connection group and kind of re-up with my kind of, spiritual passion. No, this is like a deer walking on a dry riverbed looking for water. And it's come to the right place where the flowing streams are supposed to be, and they can't find them. The psalmist is saying, I'm like a deer, and God feels like a dry riverbed. Have you ever felt that way? There's a kind of unsatisfaction that comes to you when you're looking in the world to satisfy yourself with something that only God can really satisfy you with, right? And this is language we use often at Treeline in the church. I think we're familiar with this language, right? You come in here and you're like, I've got money, I have success, I have a relationship, and I still feel a little bit empty. And Christians say, what you need is God. He's the only one that can truly satisfy the deepest parts of you. And that's completely true. But Psalm 42 is talking about an even deeper experience of dissatisfaction. When you've actually made the choice to forsake the world and run after God, and then all of a sudden you find yourself unable to feel or experience him anymore. The author is in a place of deep spiritual pain. He's literally and figuratively a long way from these powerful spiritual experiences of his past. He kind of is remembering them and like talking about them. He feels as though his life has been kind of crashed and broken by these like waves and breakers that have swept over their life. They feel like they're being drowned by them. Their head's like barely above the water, and this author feels forgotten by God. And so he just says that. God, why have you forgotten me? He says, why are you downcast, O my soul? It's really interesting. He's speaking to the deepest parts of himself, because it's the deepest parts of himself that have actually been wounded by this experience. And if you've ever felt this before, I think one of the things that makes this experience so difficult is because no one really sits you down and tells you it might happen. And so when it just happens to you all of a sudden, like the thing you heard in church though your whole life was like, Jesus can satisfy you. He will bring you joy. And you're like, that's great. I want joy. And so you begin following God, and people rarely sit you down and say, and at some time in your life, you might feel totally cut off from that joy. And it might not necessarily be your fault. See, one of the things that's so hard and confusing and difficult is when we feel these things in our life, we often feel like we've done something wrong. Right? We feel like, man, if I can't feel God, then surely it's something that's wrong with me. And actually, a lot of the Psalms talk about that tension, right? A lot of the psalmists are saying, man, I don't feel God. I feel, frustrated. I feel empty. And then he identifies, and it's because of this thing in my life. Like this unconfessed sin. And once I confess this, then I kind of find myself back in a relationship with God. But what's so interesting about Psalm 42 is this doesn't seem to be the situation at all. By all measures, the author of this is someone who loves God and is living a faithful life to him. They actually have a stellar prayer life, like no doubt better than almost anyone in this room. Like they're up day and night praying to God. They have great theology. Even like the hard things in their life, they're identifying like these waves. These are your waves. Like they believe in the sovereignty of God in their life. This person is in touch with their heart. They love the right things. This is someone whose whole life is directed towards God. I mean, look at the way they speak about God. It's my God, my salvation, my life, my refuge, my exceeding joy. And yet in this season of their life, they've lost connection with him. They just can't feel him. Like they can't see God anymore. So what has happened? How did this person get here? Well, I want to look at some factors that might have led to this. I think this is actually kind of helpful to even identify, like, okay, sometimes you feel this way. It's like, well, what led to that experience? Well, I want to read verses 4-5 and pull out some things with us. This is verse 4. It says, these things I remember as I pour out my soul. How I would go with the throng and lead them in procession to the house of God with glad shouts, with songs of praise, a multitude-keeping festival. He's kind of looking back and he's saying, man, this is what my life kind of used to feel marked by. But now in verse 5, he says, why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God, right? This kind of recurring kind of theme of the psalm. But then look what he says in verse 6. He says, my soul is cast down within me. Therefore I remember you from the land of Jordan and of Hermon from Mount Mizar. Now, this doesn't probably like ring any bells to you, but basically he's just talking about saying, I'm writing this psalm from way up north. And I am remembering my experiences with God way down in the south in Jerusalem. And so whatever is happening is this person is geographically displaced. The title of the psalm says it's written by one of the sons of Korah. And we don't know exactly who this is, but it's somebody that has this connection with like the ministry in the temple in Jerusalem. And now they're writing the psalm displaced geographically. They're way up north. Something has happened. And we don't know what it is. I mean, it could be anything. It could have been a war that's kind of swept through and they actually got taken captive. And so they're like way up north, like actually taken captive. That could have happened. Could be something else. But there's certain things that have happened. There's factors that have led them to this place. Tim Keller, he points out a few of these that I found were really helpful. And this is the first one. He makes note of this. He says, one of the things that happened is there was a disruption in their spiritual community that left them feeling really isolated. Right, this is verse 4. He says, when I remember, like when I pour out my soul, when I investigate internally, like why am I so downcast? What's going on? And I kind of just start asking questions like, why am I feeling this way? One of the things that comes out is this. I remember when I had these powerful spiritual experiences with these large groups of people. Like we together would like just be together, be singing songs, like songs of praise and glad songs, linking arms, and I would lead them in procession to the house of God, to the temple. He's saying, when I pour out my soul, when I listen to my heart, this is what I remember. What I miss is really deep friendships. And I feel like I don't have those at all anymore. If you don't know the context, but one of the things that seems to have happened is his spiritual community got disrupted. And actually, this is one of the main things I have watched happen to people in my life who find themselves in this place where you find yourself just disconnected from God, is that something happens, whether quickly or slowly, where you've lost connection with the spiritual community, the deep friendships you had. Or maybe you're just in a place where you became a Christian, but you never actually found those things in the first place. And it could be for any number of things. It could be because you moved for a job. Like some of you, you're in Ann Arbor because you moved here. Almost everyone is, right? There's a few townies who've been here forever. Most everybody is here because you moved here. And moving is this like really disruptive thing where you have like a spiritual community of friendships and all of a sudden you're kind of out on your own and it can lead to this place where you feel incredibly isolated or you get married. And all of a sudden your relationship with your community just changes overnight. The friends you've had that you're like, these are my deep, deep friends. It's just different between you now. Sometimes there's something that happens in your community. A relationship goes bad. Something happens with a leader that causes you to just distrust the whole spiritual community. And you just find yourself distanced from people. Sometimes it's a choice that we make. We just find other things to give our priority to. You start a business or you get incredibly into this degree you're pursuing and you just find yourself grinding and grinding and grinding and you stand and you look up and you go, where did all my friends go? And it's like, well, you chose to value something else. They kind of moved on. There's this disruption of community that can happen that can sometimes lead us to this place. But here's the second thing. There were events that happened in this person's life that brought confusion and pain into their story. And this could have been the same thing that happened that disrupted them from the community, right? Maybe they literally were like brought captive, right? He's talking about enemies often in this psalm. It could be something different, but this is the situation in verse 3. All day long, the people who surround him are mocking and chiding him, saying, where is your God? Whatever's happened to this person, it's public and it's visible enough that everyone around them is saying, hey, things have not gone well for you. One of the main things that I've seen move people into this place, maybe you call it spiritual depression, some kind of spiritual disconnect with God, is that events take place in your life that feel very unforeseen, and somehow something about your story plays out that unsettles you and jars you and actually disillusions you in a deep and painful way. So there's a disruption of community, but there's also events in their life that have left them confused and disoriented. And I know that a lot of people in the room today, this is actually your story. I mean, some of you're actually here like with a friend for the very first time in a long time. Maybe this is like the last few weeks have been the first season back at church. But I know for a lot of you, this is how you describe your life. You'd say, man, there's certain experiences, there's ways that I view the world, and I just can't seem to get rid of and walk away from Christianity completely. Like it's just in me to some degree. And so I can't get rid of this thing. And yet at the same time, you have experiences and parts of your story that have made your relationship with God really confusing and painful. And the God who's supposed to be everywhere often feels nowhere for you. I just want to point out, in as like sympathetic and gentle of a way as I can, that Psalm 42 is a passage in the Bible that's written by someone who is going through the very same kinds of things and who's fighting for their faith in the middle of it. The Bible speaks to these things because the Bible understands faith is not some kind of simple, obvious thing. No, faith isn't just for those who've had kind of a simple life, has gone really well, and so there's nothing they could be jaded or disillusioned about. No, Psalm 42 is written from someone who's gone through something that is so jarring that everyone around them is mocking them for believing in a God who cares about them when their life seems to be going so horribly. And it's interesting, it isn't written from someone who's kind of walking above all that mockery because they just feel the peace of God in this deep and profound way. No, it's written from the perspective of someone who feels thirsty, desperately thirsty for the God they can't seem to connect with anymore. And this is the third thing, their life rhythms have left them physically deprived. Martin Lloyd-Jones, he wrote one of the best books on this called Spiritual Depression. And he points out that actually one of the things that's happening is this disruption of their community and kind of this isolating thing. It's led maybe either through anxiety or stress, or maybe even it's just the circumstances that they've been put in. They have this like physical deprivation that's happening, right? He says like, my tears have been my food. And it seems like he's not just meaning this metaphorically, but he's like, I'm not eating. Like, I'm unable to eat. He's like up all the way through the night. He's not sleeping well. And so one of the things that can happen that pushes people into this place of feeling lost from God is when healthy life rhythms get interrupted. And some of you, and that's part of what's going on for you, is you feel disconnected from God. And it's like, one of the reasons might be your life rhythms are really off. Dawson Trotman, he started the Navigators, this kind of famous college ministry movement that spread across the country. It focused on discipleship. And so it's all like Bible, memorizing verses, like very intense kind of Bible discipleship. But it's interesting, if you talked with him, he wouldn't begin discipling you until you were willing to get enough sleep at night, started eating healthy, and started working out regularly. He's like, we can't move forward spiritually unless you actually take care of your physical body, because you are not just a spiritual person, you're a physical person. And so these factors, right, this being displaced from his spiritual community, having these life events, these are the factors that seem to have come into his life. And sometimes these things happen not because of choices we make, they just happen to us. Like a lot of you, the reason you feel pain and disconnection from your relationship with God, it isn't actually because of something you're doing and something you did, it's just because something that happened in your story. And Psalm 42, I think in a gracious way, is trying to undo some of the burden you might feel of like condemning and shaming yourself for not having a more vibrant spiritual relationship. Actually, there are times when you're doing the right kinds of things and you just don't feel God. And the Bible is identifying with that and saying, actually, sometimes when you're following Jesus, that's how it goes. But it doesn't leave us there. This is the last thing, the way home. This series in the Psalms, we've titled it Songs That Lead Us Home. Psalm 42 is that. It's a song. It's meant to be even kind of like memorized, like rehearsed, like prayed. It's this song for people who find themselves lost from God, disconnected from him. And it's actually intended to be this model that would help us find our way home. So here's some things we see from this psalm. In order to find our way home, we actually have to refuse to find satisfaction in anything less beautiful than God. This is the first thing. If we want to find our way home, we have to refuse to be satisfied with anything less beautiful than God. It's just so interesting. There's a number of things he does not have anymore, right? Friendships, like, good events going on in his life, good circumstances, even like food, sleep. There's a lot of normal things that he could point to and say, if I only had this, then I'd be satisfied. There's only one thing that he allows to define what his soul is actually thirsty for. He said, there's only one thing that I'm going to allow to be the North Star of my soul, and it's God. You see, one of the very hard things about losing connection with the experience of God, one of the things that makes it so painful, It's especially true when you're like a real, true follower of Jesus, right? It's hard to lose connection with something that's part of your life, but it's deeply painful and traumatizing when God is your whole life. And this is what's happening in Psalm 42. And we do not like to stay in places that are deeply painful. And so listen, one of the things that Psalm 42 shows us is that sometimes the path of blessing is actually the path of unmet longings. There's going to be times in your life where the path of blessing, the good life, is actually going to be a path that is marked by unmet longings. Listen, it's not always true that you're going to know the right way to go by how satisfied and at peace you find yourself to be as you walk that path. Psalm 42 teaches us that at times the blessed person, the blessed path, will actually struggle to taste and see that the Lord is good. And the only thing they're going to have to eat in that moment is their tears. And we have this strange idea that's become a centerpiece of our culture that the right life and the noble life is the always satisfied life. It's one of the things we believe deeply, that the right life is a life where I'm always satisfied. And it's interesting, this has leaked into almost everything we do. This is the way we approach our jobs now. I don't know if you've noticed this. Historically, you just got a job, right? Because you needed one. You needed money, you needed to provide for your family, so you got a job. This is how we got plumbers, right? What do? They fix leaky pipes. There's probably there's some people who are like, this is the most satisfying, fulfilling thing I've ever done. Most people, they're like, here's a problem, I can fix it, you pay me, I go back to my life, right? No, now we say, no, I need a job that satisfies the absolute deepest parts of me. I need a career that I'm going to be able to flourish and 10 out of 10 fulfill my personality and my emotional needs in. That's the kind of job I need. This has also affected the way we think of our relationships. It used to be that there was a sense of duty and responsibility, really asking the question, well, what is the right thing to do? Now we've kind of dispensed with that culturally, and now we're just asking the question, well, what is most satisfying to me? What is the easiest path to my happiness? We actually view our sexuality in this way. I mean, the idea that the right path might be one where you aren't able to be easily satisfied sexually is now a completely heretical idea. No, the good life is the satisfied life. And any life where you can't be satisfied, that's a bad life. But here's one thing I want to ask. What if the good life, what if the blessed life is actually one where at times you are not satisfied, but you feel really thirsty? What if the good life is the one that sometimes actually there's a painful disconnect between what you long for and what you're experiencing? This is one of the primary themes that the Psalms hit at again and again and again. And it's actually one of the things that Psalm 42 is talking about. And it's saying this, it's saying it's actually a more noble life to live thirsty and unsatisfied, chasing after the most beautiful things, than to satisfy yourself on lesser things. So Psalm 42 is saying, it's one of the things it's upholding, is it's saying it's actually better to be the person that's saying, I am so thirsty for God and I want him so bad and I can't find him. It's saying that's actually a better, more noble life than the person that says, I'm just going to be satisfied in something I can find right now. See, one of the widespread examples of this in our culture is pornography. You know, men and women, it's interesting, they view pornography not because it gives them something they were made for, but it gives them the shadow of something they were made for, right? And men in particular, they view pornography because they want intimacy, they want affirmation, they want a relationship where they can feel desired. But in the real world, those things are complicated. Like, they're elusive. It's actually really hard to find those things. And sometimes, even when you're in a good relationship, those deep needs feel impossible to find. And instead of living thirsty and unsatisfied, looking for the real thing, you just end up satisfying yourself on the shadow of the real thing. And in the darkness, it ends up wounding and shaming you. And you say, well, why? And the answer, well, in part is temptation, right? Well, I was tempted by this. Yeah, that's true. But it's also the stories we tell ourselves that lead us to these places, right? One of the cultural lies that keeps us from finding our way back home when we feel disconnected from God is this idea that the blessed life is always the satisfied life. Jesus actually says something radically different. Remember how he starts the Sermon on the Mount? He says, the person that is blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. It's actually the unsatisfied, hungry, thirsty person that in the end, that's the person that's going to be satisfied. So let me just ask you a question. Can you identify with this psalm? Like Psalm 42, it starts as a deer pants for flowing streams, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Like this cry of desperate thirst for God. Can you identify with that? And if the answer is not really, is the reason because you actually are regularly caught up in awe and glory and wonder in the presence of God. And so you're like, I don't feel unsatisfied. I feel like I have got God. It could be that's why. Or is it because you've actually numbed yourself to this deep thirst by allowing yourself to be satisfied by something else, something less worthy of you? See, the psalmist in this profound way is saying, no, I'm thirsty for God, for the living God. And I'd rather actually drink my tears at night as the only thing that I put in my mouth than to satisfy myself with some lesser replacement for God. He's the one I'm made for. He's the only one worthy of my life. I am not going to satisfy myself on anything less. I'd rather be thirsty and unsatisfied than satisfy myself on anything the world has to offer. This is one of the tensions of those who follow Jesus. You see, God holds our whole world in his hands, but you just can't grab hold of him with yours often. He's the God who's present, and yet he's the God who can feel sometimes incredibly absent. He's everywhere, and at the same time, his throne is in heaven and we are on earth. And it's very easy for us to medicate the pain of his felt absence in our lives by grabbing hold of something that's just easier to grab hold of than God. But one of the things Psalm 42 is teaching us is it's better to be thirsty for God than to fill yourself with the world. So this is the first point. Don't settle. If you want to find your way home, you need to stay thirsty. Second thing is this. We have to learn how to pour out our heart. If we want to find our way home, we have to actually investigate our emotions. What am I really feeling? We have to actually learn to say the quiet thing out loud. This is what he does. He says, God, what's happened in my life makes me feel like you have forgotten me. And he's not afraid of that feeling. He's not like pushing that down. Like, I don't want to feel that. I can't feel that. Like his theology isn't like stuffing down his emotions. Actually, he's taking his soul, he's investigating it, looking at it, and he's taking these real felt emotions and he's bringing them to God. And he's saying, God, I feel like you have rejected me. You've forgotten about me. Where are you? One of the things the psalm teaches us is that we actually need to pray and speak our real felt experiences. And I think we need to pray and speak our real felt experiences to God, often when they feel most like we shouldn't be feeling them. Because if you're a good Christian, you read your Bible, you're like, no, God's not forgotten about me. Like, I know that. Like, you've got good theology. And so sometimes our theology so quickly can shove down our felt experiences. And so we end up just praying to God what we think we should be feeling instead of what we actually are. Psalm 42 is opening that a little bit and saying, no, actually, you should tell God how you feel. God, I miss these powerful worship experiences I used to have. And honestly, what I have now, I'm just not content with. God, I feel like I am drowning in the wave after wave after wave that you keep throwing into my life. I feel like it's breaking me. I feel like you've rejected me. You know, there's a lot of us who I think feel unable to connect with the Psalms, in part because we're too easily satisfied knowing the right things about God. One of the things you find in the Psalms is that the psalmist is never satisfied by knowing the right theology. There's just never a moment where he's like, you know what? I know the right thing about God, therefore I'm satisfied. No, he wants to experience the substance of those things. He's like, look, I know you're with me. I know you're always near, but his question is, when am I going to come and appear before you? I want to stand before your face. I want to enter into your presence. I want to experience your grace and your kindness and your power. I just want to know about it. I want to feel it. So he pours out his heart. He investigates his heart. He listens to his heart. And he fully comes to terms with these like deep longings that are unmet longings in his life and his relationship with God. But the goal of this is so that he would understand his heart, so that he can effectively preach to it. This is the third point. He preaches to his heart. Look at what he says in verse 5. This is the recurring theme of Psalm 42. Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. Listen, we need to listen to our hearts. It's important we do this. You need to investigate your emotions, figure out what is going on inside me. Why do I feel these ways? The reason we have to do this is so that we would know how to speak to our hearts. But the problem that we have today is that we investigate and listen to our hearts so that we would let them preach to us. This is the second cultural lie that will keep you lost in the dark instead of allowing you to find your way home unless you figure this out. In culture, what we do is we allow our hearts to speak to us instead of us speaking to our hearts. Cultural lie number 2 could just be said like this: listen to your heart. Listen to your heart. If you want to find your way home, listen to your heart. One of the reasons there is so much confusion, pain, stress, anxiety, depression in our world today is we have allowed our own hearts to take a higher place of authority than anything else. My felt experiences, my emotions, my felt desires over all things. They determine my reality. And this is true from the top to the bottom. I just want to just show you this. And I'm not even right now trying to throw stones at this, although I kind of am. I'm just saying this is something that's in our culture that affects everything about how we view the world. And you might not be able to articulate this, but this is what you intuitively think because you live in our world today in 2024. It's the air we breathe. We place our emotions over our job responsibilities. Right, this is a very normal thing now. You call in, hey, I can't come to work today. Well, I need a mental health day, right? And it's like my felt emotions are more important. They define my life more than my responsibilities do. This happens in the workplace. Our felt emotions take priority over our family and relationships, right? I mean, to stay together in a committed long-term family relationship now is a miracle. It's like people just don't do that anymore. Why? Well, it's because people get to a place where they just decide, this isn't good for me anymore. And we actually call it brave when someone places their perceived emotional needs over the promises and the physical and existential needs of others. And we say, that's brave for you to actually follow your heart and leave all the needs of people in your life. We place our emotions over our biology. I mean, our emotions have more authority to define who we are than every strand of DNA encoded into every single cell of our body. We place our emotions over God. Instead of allowing God to shape our hearts, we actually allow the truths of our heart to shape our view of God. And so today in our world, this is what we are told. In the songs we sing, in the movies we watch, in the TV shows we binge. It's everywhere. It's a consistent message from the top to the bottom that you intuitively just believe because it's just the air you breathe. And it's this: my heart and my felt experience of the world, that's my North Star. And if I follow it, it will lead me home. But listen, if your heart is your North Star, and you find yourself lost in this place, I am telling you, the Bible is telling you, you will never find your way out. You cannot follow your heart out of this place of darkness Psalm 42 is talking about. Because our hearts can reveal important things in us. They're necessary and they're important. They cannot lead us home. This is how Lloyd Jones in his book, Spiritual Depression, says. He says, the main trouble in this whole matter of spiritual depression in a sense is this: we allow our self to talk to us instead of talking to ourself. And he goes, am I trying to be deliberately paradoxical? No, far from it. He says, this is the very essence of wisdom in this matter. Have you realized that most of your unhappiness in life is due to the fact that you are listening to yourself instead of talking to yourself? He says, the main art in the matter of spiritual living is to know how to handle yourself. He says, you have to take yourself in hand. Like you have to grab hold of yourself and you have to address yourself. You have to preach to yourself. You have to question yourself. You actually have to say to your soul, why are you downcast? Like you have to question it, speak to it. What business have you to feel this way? He says you actually at times have to turn on yourself. You have to upbraid yourself, condemn yourself, exhort yourself, say to yourself, hope in God, instead of just muttering about in this depressed, unhappy way. And then you have to go on to remind yourself who God is, what he has done, what he is like, and what God has pledged himself to do. And having done all of that, listen to what he says at the end. He says, you have to defy yourself, defy other people, defy the devil, and if necessary, defy the entire world and say with this man, I shall again praise God, my salvation, my God. You need to be in tune with your heart. And you need to know where your emotions are coming from. You need to know about your inner life, but you should never, ever let your heart tell you what's true. You need to be the one to speak to your heart about what's true. Your interior life, your heart, your emotions, that is a terrible North Star for your life. It can alert you to things going on. It can help you understand some things, but it can't tell you who you are. Only God can do that. And it can't tell you how to get home. We actually need someone to come and find us. You see, when we are lost in the darkness, we actually need someone to lead us back to the light. And this is the fourth thing Psalm 42 teaches us to do. We actually have to grab hold of Christ. You see, when we feel lost in the darkness, when you feel forsaken, when you feel forgotten, when you feel like wherever God is doing, his eyes and his heart are not on me, there's one person that you are always able to grab hold of in that place, and it's Jesus. See, Psalm 42 is this kind of haunting chapter of the Bible because it describes an experience that many of us have had, and it's the experience of someone who feels cut off from God. But Psalm 42, every line of it is actually haunted by the one who actually was cut off from God. Jesus is the one who would cry out that he was thirsty, is some of the very last words on the cross. Some of the very last things Jesus says, I'm so thirsty. Jesus is the one the crowds would mock him. What do they say? Where's your God? If God was for you, why doesn't he come and save you? Where's your God at? Jesus is the one who would go with the throng and he would lead them in procession, not to the temple, but to the hill of Golgotha. He is the one who wasn't just bashed and broken by the waves of God, but he was drowned by them. He's the one who on the cross would cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's the one who truly receives a deadly wound from his enemies. When you feel lost in this place, you feel totally unable to find God, you actually need God to come and find you. You actually can't just find your way out of the darkness. Psalm 42 and Psalm 43, most people think it's actually the same psalm. Like, it's weird, and people can't figure out why they put a marker in there, because Psalm 43 ends in the exact same way. This is the end of Psalm 43. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. So Psalm 42 and Psalm 43, they're the same song. And for some reason, they're split up in our Bible. We don't really know why, but listen to what Psalm 43, 3-4 says. It says this, send out your light and your truth, and let them lead me. Let them lead me to your holy hill and to your dwelling. Then I will go to the altar of God, to God my exceeding joy. You see, when you're lost in the darkness, you need the light of God. And when all you have in your life are the things your heart is telling you, you need the truth of God to break through. But the light and the truth of God, They're just two of the names of Jesus. I mean, John 8:12 says this, again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. John 14:6, Jesus just says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What God really sends to us when we are in this place and we feel and we're lost in the darkness, we can't see him, we feel like we're being surrounded by lies of our own and of our enemies, and we're asking for truth, what God actually sends to us in this moment is his Son. There is always someone who we are still able to find in this place. There's always one person who will always know where you are when you are lost in the darkness, because he is the one who's been there before. Is the one the Bible calls the man of sorrows. And when we are lost in the darkness, what we need is just more than just a path home. We actually need to know in that moment that we are not alone. And when you feel that God is lost to you, when you feel disconnected from him, we need to know that even in this place, Jesus is with us. And in a weird and mysterious way, when you feel disconnected and forsaken by God, that's your felt experience of your life, maybe more than at any other time in your life, that is when Jesus is with you. Because that is when you're actually able to identify with the very thing that he went through on your behalf. Psalm 42 is speaking about something that is hard, it is difficult, it is painful, but it is not the end of your story. Hope in God. For you shall again praise him, your salvation and your God.